Welcome to The Explainer. You know, sometimes a deeply personal struggle can snowball into a full-blown national crisis. And that's exactly what we're looking at today in Singapore, a country fighting a demographic cliff fall and a very controversial plan to pull it back from the brink. It all starts with this one number, 0.87. That's the heart of the crisis. In 2025, Singapore's total fertility rate, which is, the average number of babies a woman has, it just cratered to this historic low. So what does that actually mean? Well, for a country to just keep its population stable, you need a rate of 2.1. This is less than half of that. And as you can imagine, it's kicking off some incredibly urgent debates about the nation's future. And look, this isn't some abstract problem for future generations to worry about. As Deputy Prime Minister Gan Kim-young put it so bluntly, this is an existential challenge, and it's knocking on the door right now. This warning basically frames the whole issue not just as a statistic, but as a clear and present danger to the country's economy, its society, everything. So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at this demographic time bomb. Then we'll unpack the popular solution that everyone's talking about. And from there, we're going to dive deep into the major pitfalls, the economic drain, the tricky question of fairness, the huge regulatory hurdles, and finally, the really sobering numbers about what IVF can actually do on a national scale. Okay, so first things first, let's really get a handle on the scale of this problem and take a look at the system that's already in place trying to fix it. So to try and fix this low fertility rate, the government already offers some pretty generous support for IVF. That's in vitro fertilization, where an egg and sperm are combined in a lab. If you're eligible, you can get up to 75% of the cost covered. But here's the catch, and it's a huge one. This is the single detail that creates the entire problem we're talking about today. These subsidies are only for treatments done at public hospitals. Now, you can probably guess what happens next, right? This rule, this exclusivity, it's created a massive bottleneck. When you funnel all the people who need subsidies into just a few public centers, you get a waiting list. And in the world of fertility, waiting isn't just annoying, it can be the difference between having a baby and not. And that reality has led to what seems like a really simple solution. And here's why that waiting is so devastating. It's just a biological fact that a woman's fertility drops pretty sharply with age, especially after her mid-30s. So for couples, particularly those getting close to 40, every single month they spend on a public hospital waiting list is a month that their chances of success go down. That clock is always, always ticking. Which brings us to the solution that's on the table, the one that's getting a lot of attention. Just let people use those government subsidies at private IVF clinics. The logic seems super straightforward, right? You'd instantly get more capacity, you'd slash those waiting times, and couples would get care faster. On the surface, it sounds like a no-brainer, a perfect win-win. But, and this is a big but, this is where we hit our first major snag. Because extending subsidies to the private sector isn't just a simple switch. It brings up a really fundamental conflict in how healthcare works. And this slide, it just lays it out so clearly. You've got two totally different missions here. Public hospitals, their mission is public health. They're accountable to citizens, to the government, but private clinics are businesses. Their legal duty, their primary goal is to make a profit for their shareholders. These two things are just fundamentally at odds with each other. So you gotta ask, right? If you pump millions of taxpayer dollars into this private system, is that money really going to serve the public good of helping people have families? Or is a big chunk of it just going to get diverted to corporate profits, to fancy marketing, and to shareholder payouts? The evidence suggests the second one is pretty much inevitable. And that brings up something called opportunity cost. I mean, think about it. Every dollar you spend subsidizing a private clinic is a dollar you're not spending to make the public system better. The alternative is simple. Reinvest that money directly. Hire more specialists, expand the public labs, and fix the waiting list problem at its source. That way, every single taxpayer dollar stays in the public system, making it better for everyone. Okay, so we've got the economic side, but this quickly spirals into a really tough ethical question about how we as a society decide who gets what kind of care and who foots the bill. Now, this is a really sensitive topic, but it's absolutely central to the debate. Look, there is no doubt that the emotional pain of infertility is real and it's profound. It is a serious medical issue. But from a purely public health policy view, it's not typically considered life-threatening. Now, compare that to cancer or a stroke or a heart attack. These are immediate life or death situations, and the government does not subsidize private hospital treatment for those critical illnesses. So the ethical question is pretty stark.
How can you justify using public money for private non-life-saving care when you don't do it for private life-saving care? Okay, so let's just park the economic and ethical debates for a second. Let's say we decide, yep, let's do it. Well, the practical side of things, the regulations, that's a whole other can of worms.
I mean, you can't just throw public money at private clinics and cross your fingers, right? You'd need an ironclad regulatory system. First, you'd have to force private clinics to prove their success rates are just as good as the public ones. Second, you'd need strict price controls because otherwise clinics could just jack up their prices and eat the subsidy. And third, and this is a big one, you'd have to police the whole world of expensive, unproven add-on treatments.
Let's take a perfect example of what I mean by add-ons. Time-lapse imaging, or TLI. This is this high-tech incubator with a camera inside that watches embryos grow. The sales pitch is that it helps doctors pick the best embryo. It's slick, it's expensive, and private clinics love to promote it.
Sounds great. But what does the actual science, the hard evidence say? Well, a massive gold standard study called the TILT trial, published in one of the world's top medical journals, The Lancet, came to a very clear conclusion. It found that this expensive tech does not significantly increase the odds of a live birth. And this chart just lays it all out plain as day. The group with the fancy, expensive tech, a 33.7% live birth rate. The group with standard care, 33.0%. They're practically identical. So patients are paying more, but they're getting no real clinical benefit. And that is exactly the kind of thing taxpayers shouldn't be funding. Okay, so now let's pull the camera way, way back. Let's just pretend we can solve all the economic, ethical, and regulatory problems. Let's assume the policy works perfectly. We still have to ask the biggest question of all. Can it actually solve Singapore's demographic crisis? To get an answer, we can look at other countries. Take Australia. They have one of the highest IVF rates in the world. But even there, IVF babies account for about 1 in every 18 births. Now, don't get me wrong, that is absolutely life-changing for those 1 in 18 families, but it's still just a small slice of the whole demographic pie. Okay, how about Japan? They do more IVF cycles than any other country on Earth. The number is higher, for sure. About 1 in every 11 or 12 babies born. An incredible scientific achievement, no doubt. About 8.6% of all births.
But here is the cold, hard truth. Despite these world-leading IVF rates, both Australia and Japan still have fertility rates that are far, far below the replacement level. The inescapable conclusion is this. While IVF is a miracle for individuals, it is not a silver bullet for a nation's low birth rate. It just can't move the big demographic needle enough on its own.
And so this whole thing really boils down to one final, really tough question. It forces us to weigh a very real, very personal sorrow, the sorrow of infertility, against a massive public crisis, which is a shrinking population. It demands that we ask, with limited public money and a ticking demographic clock, what's the most effective, the most efficient, and the most fair way to invest in a nation's future? That's the complex trade-off right at the very heart of this issue.